Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at our favorite pirates. It is staying as Outlaw. I know many of you were hoping this would change, but it is indeed staying as Outlaw. So one of the obvious changes here is Roll the Bones is now a cooldown. Is affected by Restless Blades. And for those of you who don't know what that is the finishers reducing the cooldown. Now, the purpose here is pretty obvious. They want to try and stop you re-rolling Roll the Bones over and over again to try and get a good buff. Now you're kind of stuck with whatever you get. So previously, you might end up in these just horrible streaks where you keep getting crap buffs and you just end up wasting combo points. And it's kind of doubling down on the negative, right? Like a lose-lose almost. Is that you're not only not getting the buff you want, but you've also wasted maybe 10 or 15 combo points trying to get one. And you kind of feel annoyed. So its base level is a 45-second cooldown. You press it, you get a buff. That's your choice. Now, we divided the rogues up between me and Finn. We both played rogues a lot. So I covered sub and assas. And then we had somebody else play Outlaw as well. So we had two people taking a look at Outlaw. Both of them came back with the same opinion on all three of the rogue specs as they played the others for fun as well. Nah. And that sounds really sad and lame and not very detailed. But honestly, these are kind of like realistically the most unchanged specs for a long time. They're clearly trying to draw Outlaw back in. So you've got things like Kill Sprees, cap to 5 targets now. Between the Eyes doesn't stun anymore, so you get Kidney Shot back instead. It's now Between the Eyes grants 20% crit chance and damage to the target for 3 seconds per combo point. So you've got kind of a debuff that you can manage, which is something we've kind of had in the past. It's not exactly the same, but with Revealing Strike. And the rest of the spec plays pretty much the same. It plays fast. I will give it that. Sub and Assas in particular felt extremely slow, but Outlaw still does what it does. With Adrenaline Rush and all that, it still feels very, very fast. And your most notable change is Roll the Bones. There is a potential negative here, because Restless Blades does affect Roll the Bones, and both people commented that even though if you did get a bad buff, because you can reset the cooldown relatively quickly, they were still kind of tempted to just re-roll the bones to see what they would get. But it lasts 30 seconds, so you can have another go, right? You can kind of have another go. So it takes away the actual spamming elements. The spamming is gone. So I think it is better. And both guys did agree this way is better, but there is definitely a temptation to keep using it as much as possible to try and get different buffs. And what you might say, why is that a problem? Wouldn't you press it on cooldown anyway, Mike, so you get the buff again? It's really expensive. It's 50 energy. That's really expensive. That's a lot of energy to use roughly every 20 seconds or so. That is a huge amount of energy, especially when you're like getting into the fight. So you're coming up to maybe you've delayed it because you're about to go into a good solid 30 seconds of pure DPS where you can't afford to press Roll the Bones. You can't waste that 50 energy and getting a bad one. So that's something you need to bear in mind, is that it's very, very expensive. I would like to touch more in depth here on the Kyrian ability, but it's such a long description. I've actually covered it in more detail in the Sub-Rogue video, which was released on the same day as this. I really recommend to check that out because it's kind of a defining ability, but it's both good and bad, but it's also pretty complicated. So it's about 6 or 7 minutes explaining that ability for the pros and the cons. So I would really refer you to check the Sub-Rogue. But if you don't want to do that, because you're not interested in sub and you just want to chop things up with Blade Flurry, later down the line when we have all of the Covenant abilities, because we only have access to one right now, we will be returning to it. And it might have changed by then as well. So don't worry too much if you don't want to do that. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.